So, in Tower Defense Simulator, there has been some shadow updates, and in fact, these shadow updates have occurred before the takeover event was recently released. Now, there is some speculation, in fact, I pretty much know that some of the changes made to Tower Defense Simulator before the takeover event was in anticipation for the takeover event. So if you check the update in the bottom right hand corner, it will say v1.74.3. The update log does not mention this, it's only v1.74.0. v1.74.3 was the update in anticipation for the takeover event, and the takeover event itself was a shadow update on v1.74.3a, which we dub on the wiki, because shadow updates that aren't mentioned by the incremental update log is numbered or lettered really. However, there were some changes in anticipation for the takeover event which has transcended into normal gameplay. Now, the first change, which everyone has seemed to notice, is that the slime enemy now has more health in intermediate mode. So if you were to spawn it in, it would have 1000 health. However, in intermediate mode and in Oops All Slimes, it's only meant to have 100 health, which means that when the slime debuts, it's actually now a credible threat, because previously I thought slimes, they weren't that much of a big threat because they only had 100 health, but now with 1000 health, yeah, they're pretty much a significant threat, and in intermediate mode, they are quite significant. You also have to bear in mind that in intermediate mode, enemies with the slime attributes can also spawn into the slime. So an 1000 health enemy after killing another enemy, that's going to be quite difficult, especially because this enemy can't give out any cash. But additionally, another change that the developers have made to the slime is probably one that you've not noticed, is the fact that its slime attribute has been removed from the slime. Now, I'd have to assume that it makes no difference whether the slime itself has the slime attribute or not. Basically, the slime attribute, what it does is if an enemy has the slime attribute, which you can't actually enable in sandbox mode, it means that that enemy will turn into a slime, and the slime's main ability is the fact that after a certain while, after it not being defeated, it will turn into the highest boss, non-boss enemy that is currently in play. So for example, if that was a speedy boss, it will transform into the speedy boss. I think it's determined by the highest health enemy that isn't listed as a boss by the game. So for example, if it was just patient 0, it wouldn't turn into patient 0. I think it will just remain alive until an enemy spawns in. But yes, because it now has 1000 health, it is now quite a credible threat in Tower Defense Simulator, especially in intermediate mode. It also appears in many other challenges. So for example, it appears in Oops All Slime, as mentioned previously, but I think it also appears in Jail Towers. Now, these changes were probably made in anticipation for the takeover event. The only problem is, the takeover event itself, it uses slimes with only 600 health, which is very interesting because in every other game mode, and even in sandbox mode, which has default health values, it has 1000 health. Now, it's been speculated by Mentin, but I encourage this speculation, that what the developers may have done is that they may have added a differential difficulty health to the slime. So the way that enemies are coded in Tower Defense Simulator, it has like a base default value or a value that isn't connected to a game mode. However, the developers, they probably want the slime to have different health in different game modes. So for example, other enemies in Tower Defense Simulator, they do have different healths. So the breakers, for example, depending on the game mode that they are in, they have different amounts of health. So by default, they have differing amounts of health. And in sandbox mode, which uses the default value, they have 30 health. However, in something like Fallen mode, I think they have like 60 or 100 health. So to do this, the developers need to assign it different values of health depending on the game mode, and a differing default health if they spawn it into sandbox mode. But what's been speculated is that when the developers did this for the slime, bearing in mind that it now has differential health because of the takeover event now having 600 health for the slime, what the developers may have done is that they may have transferred over the 100 health that the slime was meant to have, but they accidentally added an extra 0. So by doing this, they've accidentally made intermediate mode a lot harder, and they've made a lot of the challenges a lot harder as well. In fact, they made Molten Arena a lot harder because the slimes there have 1000 health. So, you know, Molten Arenas, I mean, I don't think anyone plays PvP mode anymore, but the slimes, decent threat. Now, we see this with other enemies that the takeover event uses. So, in another shadow change that they've made, In sandbox mode, the patient 0 now has 25,000 health, and I think patient 0's default health now shows up as 25,000. Yes, it does. Even though its health in intermediate mode is 100,000, and many people would probably experience the 100,000 health patient 0 much more than the 25,000 health patient 0. Now, this is because what the developers have done is that they've used patient 0 in the takeover event, and instead of, I guess, giving it differential health or like a different amounts of default health compared to intermediate mode, what they've done is they made intermediate mode the outlier by giving it 100,000 health in intermediate mode, and they've reset the patient 0 default value to 25,000, and which is why it spawns into sandbox mode with 25,000, even though, yeah, it still does rage mode here. Interesting. This is also why, as well, you'll see enemies with different healths in fallen modes, or not in fallen mode, in hardcore mode. So if I were to spawn in the Frost Spirit, it has, I don't know how much health it actually has, it would have 100,000 health here, whereas I do believe in the Operation Ice event, obviously it had differing amounts of health depending on the difficulty, but it certainly did not have 100,000 health. Indeed it didn't. It had 250,000 health in easy mode and 1 million health in hard mode, whereas in sandbox mode, yeah, it has 100,000 health. So yeah, that's the default value that the Frost Spirit has, and it's only changed by game mode health. So easy mode, 250,000, whereas hard had 1 million. This is why you're seeing the changes to the slime and even patient 0. Patient 0 is less obvious, but the slime, they fucked it up. So yeah, that's why you see the difference. Now, another interesting thing that someone wanted me to point out, Mentin, was the fact that you can get Surf and Turf consumables in the takeover event, which I think is something left over, because I only seem to get, if I get a Triumph reward, I only seem to get sandcastles, which, given the fact that there are a limited amount of sandcastles that you can get from the Surf and Turf Battle Pass, and the only other way is to play like Fallen mode, which has like a rare chance of dropping it, it does mean that if you want to grind out Surf and Turf Battle Pass items, I'm not entirely sure if the Heatwave appears in there, but do grind out the takeover event, because actually the takeover event does seem to have one useful thing, and it's that you can grind out Surf and Turf Battle Pass consumables. Right, so another thing that the developers have done is that they've modified the Fallen Jester. So the Fallen Jester has basically a blacklist of enemies that it doesn't target. However, the developers, they've updated it so the Fallen Jester no longer targets Fallen Shields. Now, this doesn't mean, from what I've been told, that the Fallen Jester cannot affect Fallen Shields. It's just that they no longer target it. So, for example, it's like a tower, if it doesn't have hidden detection, so for example the mortar doesn't have hidden detection at any level, but if a hidden enemy was in the vicinity of the Fallen Jester right now, then that would be affected by the damage from the mortar. It's similar to the Fallen Jester affecting the Fallen Shield. It can't target it, but it can affect it. This is unlike boss enemies, which I do believe that the Fallen Jester cannot outright affect. This is the same for the Fallen Angel, the Fallen Sephiroth, the Templar, and not the Fallen King or the Awakened Fallen King, because the Fallen Jester can still affect enemies that aren't the Fallen Jester itself or boss enemies, and unless the Fallen Angel, Fallen Sephiroth or Templar spawns in as a boss, they can be affected by the Fallen Jester. And the final update that they've made to an enemy in the Shadow update, seemingly, is the fact that they fixed, apparently, the bolt. So initially, the bolt just didn't appear in the index. It also used to have glitched out cache values, and the developers have now fixed it in Tower Defense Simulator. Previously, the bolt would only give out 5 cache upon its death instead of the 65 that it was meant to give out. The 5 cache value is the default value that an enemy would give out if it doesn't have a cache value set out. So for example, if the Fallen King didn't have a cache on death value, in fact it has a cache on damage value instead, but if it doesn't have any of that, then by default it will give out 5 cache upon its death, unless it was spawned in sandbox mode unnaturally or by an admin, whereby it will give out 0. Now you may notice that we are on v1.74.3, so what about the 2 other Shadow updates? So in v1.74.1 there were changes to the UI for the Triumph thing, so that it wasn't insanely blown up or insanely tiny on mobile devices or tablet devices, whereas in v1.74.2 we actually still don't know what happened. And then finally, not really a shadow update, but something I'd like to point out. So when you choose your loadouts in, what was it, SK8P4RK, you'll notice that there are a lot of typos in it, or a lot of errors. So when it comes to the noob loadouts, it's marksmen's. Isn't it meant to be marksman or something? Not marksmen's. I have to assume that Below Natural probably didn't use a spell checker for this. I know they don't actually, the way that it's coded into the game, they can't really use spell checkers, so it's not really their fault. Well, it is their fault, but they don't have a really clean way of correcting for this, so fair enough. But then in the same loadout later on in Pro, they actually spelled it correctly. So marksman and then marksmen's. And then when it comes to the last one for Extreme, they actually have marksman, okay, fair enough. But then they have a loadout focused on dealing explosive aerial of effect damage. That's not correct. It's meant to be a loadout that focuses on taking out enemies from a distance, which you can clearly see by the Frost Blaster, Archer, Ranger, ignore the DJ booth, and the Sentry, which all have large ranges. So yeah, that's not meant to be, that's not correct. They've just copied over Explosive Expert from Master into Extreme. Also, I think Marksman might be a typo as well. It's probably men, because obviously there are multiple, I don't know, men, if you would say so yourself. I don't know. The Ranger itself, it could be female. I may consider the Ranger a female. Who knows? What's stopping me saying that the Ranger here is the pure femininity? How do we know that this tower here cannot carry any children? Who's to say?